Good evening and welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. My name is Councillor Nick Stavrou and I chair this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors seated to the left of the horseshoe table in the council chamber. Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, who's also our Mayor. On the opposite side of the table, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Adders and Councillor Susan Bigger. I also acknowledge our Director of Urban Living, Mr Scott Walker, to my right, and our Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr Brian Wee, to my left. There are other officers in attendance tonight and they'll be introduced as they present their reports. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting has been live streamed on the Council YouTube to enable public viewing of the proceedings. The meeting has also been recorded and will be made available on Council YouTube as soon as practicable after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council, and for those presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer. I will then call you one by one to come forward and address the committee. If you are making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you're opposed to the planning application, please tell the committee why you disagree and suggest an alternative approach that would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or detail in the officer's report. There's a strict limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, including councillors, and whilst as chair I can vary the time, I seldom do. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will make this sound, indicating that you have 30 seconds to conclude your presentation. And for those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take the opportunity to remind you to extend due courtesy and respect to each other and to the committee as a whole. This includes remaining quiet while other speakers are addressing the meeting and not disrupting the decision-making process of the committee. Mr Wee, are there any apologies this evening?
Through you, Chair. This evening, Councillor Galt, Councillor Gillies and Councillor Franco are apologies.
Thank you, Mr Wee. It's noted. Adoption and confirmation of the minutes. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting held on the 3rd of July 2023? Councillor Sinfield.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Watson.
Happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Is anyone opposed? There be no opposition. I put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Declarations of conflict of interest. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared this evening? Councillor Watson, you have your light on. Thank you. There be no conflict of interest. We move on to the main part of the agenda tonight, the presentation of officer reports. The first report this evening is 3.1, 69 Broadway, Camberwell. Partial demolition and construction of alterations and additions associated with the dwelling in a heritage overlay. This report will present to Ms Rea. Ms Rea, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. The subject site is located within the Neighbourhood Residential Zone 3 and included within Heritage Overlay Precinct 159, which is the Prospect Hill Estate Precinct. A planning permit is required in this instance under the Heritage Overlay only. The dwelling is known as Wee Nesty and was built circa 1900. It's graded significant within the precinct due to its architectural quality in the Queen Anne style and is by well-known architects Usher and Kemp. There's particular recognisable features of the original dwelling, including the Marseille pattern terracotta roof tiles, the half-timbered gables, the high hip roof, the red brick and stucco walls, and wraparound arcade verandas. The siding of the building also addresses the Broadway to the south and east. The statement of significance also recognises the historical significance which being the rising middle class born from emerging secondary industries in Victoria at the turn of the century. The MMBW plan from 1904 shows the building footprint of the existing dwelling, as well as an asphalt tennis court and a small unlabelled shed. Located on the land now is a summer house and pool house. The precise date of construction is unknown. However, various heritage experts have nominated the style as being prior to 1920s through to late 1920s. There is evidence that this outbuilding was in existence in 1945 and that this building has been modified and altered over time. There is also a garage located on the eastern side, built circa 2001, and there's a tennis court, lap pool and extensive gardens that form part of the subject site. The application seeks to demolish the summer house and make alterations to the existing dwelling. The proposal seeks to construct a ground floor living room, meals area and terrace area. At basement level, a car park with additional amenities such as gym, home theatre, games room, wine cellar and storage will be provided. The application has been assessed thoroughly by Council's Heritage Advisor. Support of the application was given. The Heritage Advisor's assessment and recommendations are located within the planning assessment attachment on pages 44 to 59. All matters recommended by the Heritage Advisor are shown on the decision plans dated the 21st of June or have been included as conditions. Importantly, the application seeks to retain the existing roof form, chimneys and eaves intact, and the extension has been designed to be plain, subservient, so as not to compete with the beautiful Queen Anne style. A previous application was refused by Council in 2020 and upheld by the Tribunal in 2022. This application was significantly larger than the proposal before Council tonight. The previous application sought the demolition of large parts of the existing dwelling, including the summer house, ground floor wings of the dwelling and architectural detailing including roof forms, chimneys, dormers. This was all assessed by Council as fabric that contributed to the heritage place. A very large extension was located at both ground and first floor levels, and in addition to the extensive demolition, the alteration was not supported by the Tribunal or Council because of its built form, scale, height and setbacks. The current application has considered the findings of the previous VCAT decision, as well as Council's local policy at clause 15031S. As previously stated, the site is significantly graded and within a heritage precinct where its statement of significance refers to late Victorian and Federation-style dwellings. While the summer house is recognised as being an early element on the site, it appears its construction falls outside the era of late Victorian and Federation construction. It also appears that the building has been altered. The summer house has not been recorded as a notable feature of the site and is all part of its significant grading. Given the significant reduction of scale of the proposal, the careful analysis undertaken by Council's Heritage Advisor to ensure that no notable fabric will be removed or affected, officers have recommended support of the application subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rea. Councillor Hollingsworth, your light is on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I didn't want to declare a conflict, but I did want to just declare that I've noticed with the applicant being represented by Hanson Partners that Craig Zami is one of the directors of that organisation, and recently I served with Craig on the Burundara Urban Awards selection. Now, I just wanted to state that there is no conflict. I have no connection to this project at all, but I do just know one of the directors. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth, as I said, and we will minute that item. Thank you for letting us know. We move now to the submission part of the particular item. 4 people have indicated they wish to make a submission on this matter. 3 are against the recommendation in the report and 1 support the recommendation. Once I've announced your name, please to the top of the horseshoe table. And if a submitter is not present and when the name is called, we will move to the next submitter. I remind everyone that there's a 3-minute limit, and I shall call Ms. Liz Burton, followed by Ms. Jane Oldham.
Good evening. Liz Burton, Camberwell.
Thank you very much.
I'm speaking against the motions to approve the planning permit. I attended the VCAT hearing referred to in the officer's report. Council's expert heritage witness, Nigel Lewis, opened his written evidence saying 69 Broadway now forms the most significant building in this outstanding sub-precinct. A strong message, part of Mr David Song's speeches on behalf of Council, were that 69 Broadway is the most significant place in this most significant part of one of Burundara's most significant heritage precincts. Mr Lewis, in his evidence, and the officer's report you have tonight, both comment upon the importance of the landscape setting this significant house is situated within. On page 5 of 59 of the officer report states, the character of the precinct is broadly characterised by well-vegetated front gardens. The mature street trees, large detached dwellings and spacious garden setting lend itself the unique and high-quality intact heritage setting. It is accepted by heritage experts and the member in the VCAT decision that the dwelling is positioned on the land so that the house can be viewed in the round or seen from both Broadway to the south and the east. The garden setting takes an extra significance in this context. Slides 2 and 3, please. My concern is the location of the basement driveway and its entry ramp in the front setback. The slide 4, please. The entry ramp, albeit landscaped according to the proposed permit condition, will be located on the grassed area to the left of the bay window when viewed from Broadway. It will be prominent, wide, heavily sloped and visible, and sit within 5.2 metres inside the southern boundary and not far from the bay window and entrance of this particularly significant dwelling. There will be a 1.2 metre steel batten-style fence running from the basement entry to the house, just behind the projected bay window. Despite the Heritage Advisor's comments, I submit that the applicant be asked to reconsider the design so that either the basement driveway is somewhere less conspicuous on the site or another solution found. A recent renovation in Victoria Road of a heritage house incorporated a vehicle elevator concealed in a garage that took vehicles, bikes and equipment from the basement rooms and car park to street level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burton. Councillors, are there any questions for Ms. Burton? There be no questions. Please return to the gallery in your seat. Thank you very much for your presentation this evening. I call upon Ms. Jane Oldham, followed by Mr. Peter Robinson. Let's commence with your name and suburb. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jane Oldham from Camberwell. I would like to acknowledge that the owner and architect are proposing a design far more respectful of the heritage significance than they did in previous iterations. I would also like to acknowledge officers for their work on this application and recognise their reports reflect their best intentions. Along with others in the gallery, I attended the 4-day VCAT case discussed in the officer's report. Tonight I draw attention to 2 aspects of the member's decision not reflected in that report. The conclusion If a decision to grant a permit tonight is to withstand challenge at VCAT, these two aspects need to be addressed first, i.e. more work is needed by the applicant. Slide 1, please, thank you. Firstly, partial demolition of significant original fabric. Clause 1503-1L of the planning scheme requires that partial demolition of significant built fabric can be permitted only if the works will not adversely affect the cultural heritage and will assist the long-term conservation of the building. The application before the member contained no detailed information or evidence that fulfilled the second part of that policy. He described this as a significant omission in paragraph 100. In summary, he said not meeting that heritage policy on partial demolition was a fatal flaw in this proposal, page 28. The officer's report does not reference this aspect of the member's decision. But just like the application the VCAT member considered, the one before you tonight contains nothing on how the works will assist long-term conservation either. It is completely silent on that point. So, if a permit is granted tonight and then challenged at VCAT, how will Council justify not following the process clearly directed by VCAT? Slide 2, please. Demolition of the summer house. The member had two heritage experts before him, one saying the summer house could be demolished because it was not built at the same time as the house, was of a different architectural period and was too altered. The other expert, called by Council, Mr Nigel Lewis, on behalf of Council, said photographs showed it was built in the 1920s or earlier, the roof form, tiles and brickwork being original. Mr Lewis said the demolition of the summer house is not acceptable. Tonight, you were in the same position. Council's heritage advisor in the report has said it can be demolished, and Ms Rea has already explained his views. So what did the member decide? He said that the age and the relationship to the main dwelling of the summer house should be, I quote, an important consideration in its proposed demolition. If I could have the third slide, please. He also said, I quote, I agree, the summer house could be demolished. However, this should be reassessed in association with any new development proposal that may be sought. For example, it is open for recording and history of how it was built. I submit that such a reassessment has not occurred. 3 more planners and heritage advisors have visually inspected it, just as they had done and the member did in the first case. No research or investigation of its history has been done. Few 100-year-old summer houses exist in Boroondara or Melbourne. This one might be significant in its own right, but there has been no assessment or investigation. If it is found that this
Mrs.
summer
Alton,
house...
have you got much more to go?
No, one sentence.
Yeah.
Is worthy of retention, the existing alterations could be removed, the original part and the original what's left repurposed to join an addition to provide the accommodation that the new owner is seeking.
Thank you, Ms. Oldham. We have Councillor Thompson. A question for Ms. Oldham.
Thank you, Ms. Oldham, for your presentation. Just one question. Obviously, you made mention of the summer house. If the summer house was to be retained, obviously requires probably resubmission of plans. What's proposed by the architect and the applicant is to build a new living area. Mm. Would you be comfortable with that new living area to be positioned closer to Broadway Street? Because at the moment it occupies the location of the summer house.
My first preference would be for the summer house to be retained and repurposed as the heritage policy does anticipate, so that it could become part of an addition that provided the accommodation that the current owner is proposing, albeit that they're not going to live there ongoing. Could it be in front? I suspect that would It could be, unless it was found to be significant fabric, because then the heritage policy doesn't allow for an addition that would obscure significant heritage fabric. And I'd have to think about if it were contributory.
That's okay. Thank you for the...
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mrs. Oldham. You may return to your seat in the gallery. Thank you. I call upon Mr. Peter Robinson, followed by Ms. Sandra Rigo. Mr. Robinson, your name and suburb. Thank you.
Peter Robinson from Broadway in Campbell. Thank you for your time this evening. I'd like to start a little bit uniquely to say thank you to the Council for the support you've provided Heritage to date. It's really significant. I was one of the original objectors to the plans, went to VCAT, and the support provided by the Council through the CEO, particularly the engagement of David Song, was exceptional and greatly appreciated, and a good result, the right result was achieved, and that is the protection of a significant property in a significant area that has huge importance for us as residents, those that are staying, not those that are leaving this particular area. So I think the two ladies before me have spoken exceptionally well, so I won't repeat what has been said. My main concern is for the protection of the fabric, particularly around the summer house, and as has been stated, the heritage policy is pretty clear. It must, for a significant property, there must be some improvement to the property through modification. Demolition of a 100-year-old building that's been graded within that area as significant should not be taken lightly. And I think a fair assessment needs to be made as to the suitability of that summer house to have any modification except for improvement to it. So that's probably my key request, is the summer house retained, the plans should be modified, noting that the plans are not going to benefit anyone other than the next owner. So this property is for sale, so it doesn't meet the criteria of the intent behind a lot of the planning scheme, which is about trying to increase amenity for those that are going to live in the area. This is for pecuniary gain only. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Any questions for Mr. Robinson? There be no questions. You may return to your seat. Thank you. I will now return to the officers for the matters arising. Ms. Ray? Oh, apologies. Sorry, you're quite right. There's one more speaker. Ms. Sandra Rigo. Sorry, Ms. Rigo. I'm not trying to finish the meeting early, I can assure you.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman.
If you could state your name and suburb.
Certainly. My name's Sandra Rigo. I'm a Town Planner and Director at Hanson Partnership, representing the permit applicants this evening.
Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity to speak, and good evening, councillors. I just want to perhaps quickly respond to a couple of comments made by Mr. Robinson previously. Just to correct a couple of things he said, the summer house is not graded itself. It is actually not even mentioned in the statement of significance. Council, with respect to that summer house, Council has had its own heritage study undertaken previously in relation to the property, which identified the Queen Anne dwelling as being significant. We don't dispute that. Council's own advisor in the previous application and this application has also assessed the summer house. Council's heritage expert in relation to the previous VCAT hearing also assessed the summer house. We've had two heritage consultants engaged by my client who've also assessed the summer house. Suffice to say, and there's been a number of objectors involved in this application and the previous one, suffice to say, nobody has established the heritage significance of this house. It's been quite the opposite. What has been discovered is that it's not original, it's not significant fabric, it's not mentioned in the statement of significance, it's not part of the original building fabric. In fact, it's a replica designed to match the dwelling, and it's been extensively modified since its construction. Council's heritage advisor doesn't oppose its demolition, nor was it opposed by VCAT. It is, we say, quite right that what the summer house does do, and I wasn't intending to focus on that, but it has clearly been the focus of the speakers, so I think it's probably worth focusing on that. The demolition of the summer house, in fact, facilitates a design response that we say is respectful of the heritage fabric. and importantly, the garden setting within which the Queen Anne House sits. It enables a single-storey addition to be sited at the maximum distance from both the Broadway itself and frontage, and also substantially, you can see that it pivots away from the main house and the way the main house presents to both frontages of the Broadway. There's no heritage basis upon which to refuse the demolition of the summer house. We completely agree and accept the condition on the recommendation in relation to recording, photographic recording of the summer house, and we support that, the inclusion of that condition. I just want to finish up by saying that it's not uncommon for custodians of heritage places and buildings to wish to alter or add to them, to modernise them, to upgrade them, and basically to invest in them, and that leads to their long-term conservation. Change is facilitated in the planning scheme, but it's not prohibited to alter a heritage place. The planning scheme sets out the parameters within which that change is managed to ensure that the heritage values of the place are respected. Again, I think I'll just finish up by saying that we certainly support the council officer's recommendation. This application is a significant reduction to what was previously refused by council and upheld by the tribunal. We endorse the conditions that have been put to you, and we certainly respectfully request the council to adopt its council officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms Rigo. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of questions. Obviously, you answered my last question first, which was saying that you fully support the officer's recommendation.
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Not to harp about the summer house, but I do have one question that came out of one of the presenters. I think it was Miss Oldham. Would your client at all accept the retention of the summer house if it could be repurposed?
I think it is in a difficult location. It has been significantly altered, so repurposing, again, it would probably need to be merged into an addition, so I'm not quite sure what the benefit would be, because you don't, at the moment, the only way you see the summer house is by actually looking through the fence. It is, I think it's in the order of about 30 or so metres back from the Broadway itself, so it is a subservient element already to the main house, which sits proudly towards both frontages of the street. So from a visibility point of view, there's nothing to be gained by repurposing it. It's probably more of a cost. It's also would affect the basement construction underneath it.
So that it would. So to go back to that question, just to sort of summarise that, would your client accept that approach? Should council move in that direction?
Look, I think suffice to say that if their intention was to keep the summer house, they would have already proposed that in the design. The current design doesn't facilitate that.
So that's a no. Thank you. And just one further question, and this might be more of a clarification. Ms Burton announced that the impact for the driveway, and I'm not seeing this myself, but an expert through your eyes might be able to clarify this for us. The impact of the driveway entrance to the basement impacts on the front garden aspect, which is a citation.
Yes.
Is it true that that front garden area is actually increasing with the removal of the tennis court? It's not diminishing as a result of the car park entry?
That is correct. The original application had what we call a pickle tennis court at the front, which is no longer being proceeded with. Originally, the basement was closer to the main house. It was then pushed further away as much as possible. So it's over 8 metres at its closest point to the house at the moment. Importantly, the driveway obviously is perpendicular to the front boundary, so you open the gates and you go into the driveway. The basement is actually set almost parallel to the boundary. So from the street, you actually don't see. It's different to, for example, number 64, the Broadway around the corner, which if you're standing at the gates, you look right down at the basement going into that property, and it's very visible from the street and from a pedestrian walking past. This is different. In siting that basement away from the driveway, and you've got to basically do a quasi-left turn to go into the basement, you're actually in effect screening that as much as possible from view from the street. So for a passing pedestrian, if the gates were to be opened, because this is actually a very difficult property to look into the front garden. It's very well screened at the front. But if the front gate, if those gates were open and you could look down, you will see that main house presenting, and off to the side to an angle would be the beginning of a basement heading down. The idea with the landscape plan is to actually screen, have growing planters, and that's coming down over that edge. So again, to screen as much as possible.
So just, sorry to go back to very quickly response to that question. Is there actually more garden facing Broadway
Yes.
now compared to what's currently existing?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Councillor Thompson just asked his final question, which was exactly what I was going to ask, so it's been answered. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. So can you just restate for me or re-explain, because you did touch just briefly on this idea of how it assists in the long-term conservation, but it seemed to me you were sort of saying that every renovation would assist in long-term conservation. Is that how you interpreted that?
Not necessarily. That context of the long-term conservation of the building, the way I see it in this particular context is, and in general in terms of the heritage properties that are privately owned, the planning scheme facilitates some change in that it sets out these are the parameters. And in my view, it does that because it acknowledges that if you don't invest in these properties, they deteriorate over time. Anyone that lives in an older building, and I live in an Edwardian building, you need to constantly maintain that property if you want to protect its heritage values and its heritage fabric. That requires that's a financial imposition on the owner, and as an owner of a heritage property, you take on that responsibility. By facilitating modernisation, upgrading, adaptation of heritage places to today's standards of living, people are investing financially in maintaining those properties, and they also have a vested interest in protecting them.
So you don't have a specific way in which this particular case, you weren't making the argument here how they're particularly. It sounds like a more general argument. Is that?
That's a general argument. At a more detailed level, what you see here is a substantial change from the previous application that looked at modifying a considerable part of that rear, like the original roof line, which is now all fully protected.
That's true, but we're not looking at that.
No, so
tonight.
those sort of conservation, those detail, they're design details that protect the values of the current building in the proposal. The long-term conservation values are the more broader arguments in favour of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bigger. There being no further questions, Ms. Rieger, thank you for your presentation. You may return to your seat. We now return to the officers' matters arising. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first comment I would like to make is or matter of clarification, I should say, is with respect to Nigel Lewis, who was Council's expert at the former VCAT hearing. At this hearing, Nigel Lewis made a comment that this was the most significant place in a very significant precinct. It is not in dispute tonight how special HO 159 is. It is as special as many of our other heritage precincts. In reality, the significant grading is similar to a lot of other significant gradings within that heritage precinct. A map was produced as part of the report that shows that there are a high concentration of significant graded properties, and that's part of the richness of this heritage precinct. This building is not on the Victorian Heritage Register. It is not an individual listing. It forms a part of a precinct that has a high level of intactness and a high level of significant graded buildings. So to say that this one individually is the top of the hierarchy is not quite correct in terms of how we read the planning scheme, the planning policy that relates to heritage, or the schedule of gradings. but it is not in dispute that this is a special building. It is significant graded. The second matter of clarification is with respect to the garden setting of the ramp. During the planning permit process, Council's Heritage Advisor actually sought for the ramp to be located further towards the street, i.e. in closer proximity to the southern stretch of the Broadway, because the Heritage Advisor was seeking a clear separation between the ramp and the bay window at the front of the dwelling. What resulted in the amended plans that's before you tonight is an 8.25 metre separation between the ramp and the dwelling itself. And that separation is important to provide the garden setting. While it is recognised by moving the ramp towards the street that potentially views to the street would become more apparent, because you've moved it 4 metres towards the southern stretch of Broadway. But in this instance, the elevation is actually a palisade steel fence, which is not dissimilar to a traditional heritage fence. So it doesn't have the bulk and mass that one might expect with a car park structure or even an elevator or lift that might have been suggested tonight. With respect to the summer house demolition, VCAT in its decision does acknowledge that the summer house can be demolished and does put some parameters around what future applications should think about. Can they connect the basement up to the dwelling itself through the summer house? You would have heard from Ms Rigo tonight that it was contemplated and it was not one that was being sought by the permit applicant. In terms of the third speaker, there was mention of heritage policy requires improvement. The word improvement does not form part of the actual policy itself. It certainly is something that council officers strive for. We want improvement in our heritage precincts, but it's not dictated by our policy itself. So the considerations for alterations and additions for significant graded buildings are as follows. Firstly, to retain significant built fabric and not normally allow demolition. Permit partial demolition of significant built fabric for the purpose of additions and alterations only if the partial demolition, additions and alterations will not adversely affect the cultural heritage significance of the place and will assist in the long-term conservation of the building. And then thirdly, support the demolition of non-original or non-contributory additions. So we've heard that with the statement of significance for 69 Broadway, the actual summer house is not listed as a significant element of this dwelling. We know that it is not designed by Usher and Kemp. We know that it was not a part of the original dwelling itself. It's a later addition. It is not in dispute tonight that it's been there a long time, but it does not form part of the significance of the precinct, which is that late Victorian to Federation style. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Ray. Councillors, are there any questions for Ms Ray? Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Ms Ray. Through you, Chair. Just two very quick questions. One relates to not so much permeable garden space, but just garden space from what the current situation is to the proposed. Just to reconfirm from an officer's perspective, is there actually more garden space fronting onto Broadway Street as a result of the proposed plans?
Thank you, Mr Thompson. So first of all, the latest set of plans seeks to demolish the tennis court and no longer replace that with a pickle court. So that will turn back a lot of that land available to garden and really provide that garden setting. The subject site is very unique, that it's over 3,000 square metres. So it's a very, very, very big property that allows a garden to flourish in all areas.
And does that actually enhance the conservation of the property by virtue of increasing the garden space?
It certainly does, and it also goes to the significance of the building, that the original designers quite purposely designed the house to face the two sections of the Broadway. So you read the dwelling in the round from a 360 degree, and having garden as much around the dwelling as much as possible is certainly something that keeps that garden setting and that traditional vision by the architects in place.
Yep. And just my final question through you, Chair. There was a part A and part B in that previous one, apologies. Final question, in relation to the proposed addition being the living space, is there any other location that provides any better conservation approach on this property other than the location that's currently proposed?
There's certainly the location to the rear of the site is always a preferred location for any extension to a dwelling at all gradings, even non-significant contributory. You want to keep the streetscape intact as much as possible. In this instance, particularly because of the way the Broadway sweeps around from the north and to the east, the northwest corner would be the preferred location of any extension to the dwelling.
As proposed.
As proposed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Thank you. The next questioner is Councillor Hollingsworth, followed by Councillor Addis, followed by Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question with regard to the ramp going down to the basement. The presenter, speaking on behalf of the applicant, Ms. Ridger, said that there's proposed to be some planting around the rail. I just wanted to see if that was actually listed as a condition.
We actually haven't got a landscaping plan as part of the documents, and nor have we imposed a condition relating to a landscaping plan. The site is 3,000 square metres, so there is plenty of location for plants. In addition, there is a requirement under our local law for a replacement tree to deal with that liquid amber that is being removed separate to this planning application.
Right. I recall, I think it was Ms. Oldham that mentioned the ramp, railing around the ramp potentially could perhaps be perceived as a little bit of disconnect between the property and the extension. And if it was, if some soft landscaping was to go around it, it may be less visible from the driveway entrance and the front of the house. And when the applicant's representative mentioned landscaping there, I wondered if this application was supported, if that could be noted to be included.
Certainly, if we got to that point, we could include a condition requiring a landscaping plan. Looking more closely at the plans, there are existing vegetation, 3 particular trees at the entrance of the ramp as it exists at present. And there's also some vegetation around the dwelling itself in garden beds, so that's not proposed to be changed.
No, but there'd be no problem to include some soft landscaping in addition?
Yes, we can arrange a proposed condition.
Supported, thank you.
Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. Ms Ray, my understanding from reading the report is that with this application, very little of the original heritage, the noted heritage fabric, is altered or removed. I think, are you able to just clarify that? I think there were little doorways and not much
Yeah,
else?
sure. Certainly the existing dwelling as it exists today, we've worked very hard to make sure that as much as the original dwelling will be retained. So all chimneys will be retained, the eaves and the roof line. So effectively we're connecting the new extension of the living and meals area through punching part of the wall to connect those two elements. So it's a very sympathetic extension and very minimalistic in its touching of the original fabric, other than the summer house.
And it clearly reads as different. You certainly wouldn't confuse it as part of the original house. The extension.
Yeah, look,
the proposed extension, I'm
yes,
sorry.
So the extension of the living and meals area includes stucco, which is actually a part of the feature of the original building. One of the Usher and Kent, original design features was the stucco on the gables with the half timber detailing. And so that's picked up an element that's already on the existing dwelling and put it into a modern form that is low, no higher than 4.5 metres other than its chimney. So it sits underneath the eave of the existing roof.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Addis. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to officers, I'm wondering if officers might restate perhaps what they said earlier in relation to the heritage significance of the property, that it's in a significant overlay is what I heard, but it's not individually significant. Is that the nuance that I understood?
Excuse me again. It is significant graded, and it forms a little precinct. I shouldn't use the word precinct. It's in a very large precinct, in fact, and that precinct is very well appreciated by council and its community. It forms, there's an amalgamation of a number of significant graded buildings. The Broadway has a lot of intact dwellings, so it elevates its presence and intactness and its heritage understanding because of the number of, or the concentration of significant graded buildings. But we're not talking here about a state significant building or one that's individually listed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Biggar.
Sorry, I think I just need a little bit, that just got a little bit more confused by that last bit of the response. So can I just ask that again? The property that we're looking at, 69 Broadway, is individually significant. Is that not? That is correct. Correct? The property itself is individually significant. Okay. Were you referring when you said that there wasn't significance specifically attached to the summer house? Is that what we were talking about?
I think the question is whether it's individually significant.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe just to clarify, yes, this is an individually significant site, and I think if you go into the detail, which was described earlier, there's elements that are significantly listed within the citation, and those elements were discussed a little bit earlier. But this is an individually significant dwelling, and it's one of many individually significant dwellings within this large precinct. So I think that's the reference that was being made by Officer Ray in relation to its relevance to other significant dwellings within that area and that wider area. It's at the same level of other significant dwellings, individually significant dwellings.
So again, just to clarify a little bit more, apologies for this, but are you saying that the presence of a number of individually significant houses makes this individually significant house less significant, or what is the
No, I
significance
wouldn't-
of the statement?
Again, through yourself, I wouldn't look at it that way. I think the implication that was indicated earlier is that this is the cream of the crop, that this is a standalone dwelling, that there's no other significant dwelling like it in the precinct. I think the point being made is there's a number that have the equal standing of individual significance within that wider precinct.
Yeah, this is sort of first among, or equals, sort of. So it sounds like we were misinterpreting, maybe I was misinterpreting, because it sounded like you were actually saying it was less important, when in fact what you were saying was even, it is a very important property in this precinct. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Then can I just go on to ask, are we confident, or how confident are we that officers, that the summer house has been fully considered in terms of its potential significance? If I need to clarify a bit further, the applicant has suggested, the applicant's representative has suggested that the summer house has been fully considered and not found to be significant, or fully considered by council, and yet, from my understanding of the report and the VCAT, there was question posed about whether or not further consideration should be given to its importance.
Yeah, certainly the tribunal member did suggest that that be explored, but certainly there is no mandate, if you like, through policy that permanent applicants should come up with a design response that keeps every single section of an existing building. Certainly buildings need to evolve as people who live in them evolve and their needs and requirements change. So the permanent applicant has clearly attended the previous VCAT hearing, read the VCAT decision, turned their minds to what can we do to extend the house that complies with the policy and also has regard to the previous VCAT decision. The tribunal did have the option of saying we would not accept the demolition of the summer house whatsoever. That could have formed part of his determination, and it didn't. It actually left the door open for it to be removed, and although he does note that they should explore opportunities to keep.
Yeah. Thank you. Can I continue?
Further questions?
Yeah, just two more.
Absolutely.
So our first speaker, Liz Burton, raised the question around the driveway closeness to the bay window. Can I just verify that when you talked about that now being 8 meters, is that a new change since the documents that the public would have seen? And so can we presume that would have been an improvement over what she has seen and is responding to?
My understanding of Ms Burton's submission was the ramp's closeness to the actual street itself, not the dwelling. So Council's Heritage Advisor has actually asked for the ramp to be located closer to the street because he wanted to get that separation, that 8.25 metre separation between the house and the ramp itself. So in fixing the separation with the dwelling has pushed the ramp closer to the street.
Yep. Thank you. And my final question is just, again, I guess I have pondered this before, and I apologise that it's still, I'm not quite comfortable with the response, and I wonder if officers have a response about the fact that it seems that there are two requirements that we refer to, and you referred to it a few minutes ago, but I don't think that you've addressed one, because it is an and, not an or, and it says, and assisting the long-term conservation. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, thank you. So the long-term conservation, there's been a number of applications of recent that's sort of turned on this point about its long-term conservation. We've heard from the permit applicant tonight that their aim in the long-term conservation is to finance and put money into the building itself. Officers have held the view previously that the long-term conservation is bringing the home up to modern-day standards, that this building was built in around 1900, so 120 years ago, and the facilities in the dwelling itself is not necessarily how we live today. And the demolition plan shows that this house has got lots of small rooms, whereas we do a lot more open living in modern day. The application through its basement also provides the modern day facilities, such as a number of car spaces, gymnasium, wine cellar, all the amenities, if you like, that they wouldn't have had back in the year 1900. In terms of the long-term conservation in this instance is the fact that they're hardly touching the original significant fabric. And that is a long part to play in the long-term conservation. If you minimally touch the existing building, that is helping with its conservation.
I'm sorry. I guess I'm still... I still don't see the distinction you're making between the two requirements, because it seems to me that you're responding to the first requirement, which is about, only taking out heritage where required. But it seems to me that our argument right now on the second part of that statement really seems to just... That could apply to any application, I would have thought, that we receive here, because basically all applicants are updating their house to include modern... No?
Is there a clarifying question, I think?
That is,
yeah,
I guess...
Yeah, that's the clarifying question, yeah.
Through yourself, Chair, perhaps just responding to that comment, and that's not necessarily the case. There might be proposals and propositions put forward that demolish elements within a property, within a significant graded property, but there's not a significant reinvestment back into that site that would enable and support the long-term livability and usability of the existing dwelling or significant elements on that dwelling. So just whilst many of the proposals put forward before us under heritage do involve that, particularly in this sort of location where there's value and merit in investing into dwellings in this location, given the value of those properties and the value of the land, that's not a given and not always the case. In this case, it is. In this case, there's a significant investment into the property that forms a whole part of this proposal, and on balance, that investment is supporting the long-term retention of the existing significant dwelling on that property and significant building.
Thank you.
Councillor Addis, follow-up question.
Sorry to have a second go. I know this might be labouring the point a little, but in terms of the significance but not a significant individual grading, does this relate to this being one of our very earliest precincts when houses were graded within the precinct rather than having all contributory and then we have significant?
Boroondara has customised the way that they define significant. So in our policy, we say that a site that's significant has the same meaning as if it was in its own heritage precinct. But when you look at, say, Heritage Victoria and the way that they approach the hierarchy of significance, they would put that extra element, if you like, and put the very, very, very special buildings in its own heritage overlay. But we have taken a more precinct view but defined it in our heritage policy that significant dwellings means effectively on the map, the ones in red, and they have the same meaning as if they were just taken out and put in their own.
So it does afford it the protection that its own individual listing would give it?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Addis. Councillor Hollingsworth, another question?
I'd like to foreshadow a motion at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. I may have one minor question before we move on. I think something that Councillor Bigger raised about the investability and the ability to maintain the property. Has this property ever been renovated before?
This dwelling certainly has been renovated before. In 1959, it was converted to a hospital and then converted back to a dwelling. So there has been numerous families and numerous uses on the site over time. So, yes.
So the sort of my follow-up then is that if it has been renovated before, then isn't that a little bit counter to the question that the investment will not be there in the future, because we've already seen it in the past. You know, at some point in the past, that point would have been the future.
Yeah, so for example, if as part of this application that was before us tonight, which it's not, mind you, but if there was an application that sought to subdivide the property and subdivide the garden off, that might mean some changes to the existing dwelling that is not necessarily going towards its long-term conservation of the heritage place, because you're taking parts of the original fabric away. Yeah. So that's an example of where long-term conservation is not being demonstrated.
Sure, I understand that. But just, I might labour it a bit more. My point is that there has been investment in the past for that same building, and both the house and the summer house are more than 100 years old. So there is the ability to invest in its long-term sustainability, given the summer house is there. So that's my question. It's not the only way to preserve it.
Correct. It's not the only way of preserving the house.
Thank you for that. Questions? Councillor Hollingsworth, your motion.
Thank you. I would like to put forward the officer recommendation with an inclusion to support landscape schedule.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillors, do I have a seconder? Councillor Thompson.
Happy to second that once the words come up.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. To assist the mover, is anybody opposed to? There been no opposition. Councillor Hollingsworth, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say, if the inclusion to what I believe with the amended plans refers to item C5, if there could be some inclusion on the officer recommendation to further expand the landscape, to include the words that a landscape proposal be subject to.
Yeah, Councillor Hollingsworth, I will liaise with governance here and the officers and see how we proceed,
Wonderful.
whether we need to have an adjournment or not.
Right, thank you. But also just to include some soft landscape around the ramp where the basement car park is. Thank you.
Is that understood in terms of what we need to do?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're just working on it now.
Chair, would it assist if I moved to short adjournment?
Given the indeterminacy of time, yes. Do I have a seconder?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I put the motion to a vote. Motion's been on a go. We're in adjournment. Thank you. I have a motion to resume the meeting.
So moved.
Thanks, Councillor Park. Councillor Sinfield seconded.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Hollingsworth, are you still...
To open the
I
meeting.
put the motion to the vote.
Thank you.
Those in favour?
Thank you.
To resume the meeting?
Thank you.
Thank you. Meeting is resumed. Thank you very much, councillors. Councillor Holmes, I return to you as the motion is up on the screen, I believe. Are you comfortable to still move that motion?
I am comfortable, and I thank the officers for putting the word basement ramp in there to finish off the sentence, the inclusions. So yes, I'm satisfied.
Thank you, Councillor Holmesworth. Now, as the mover, would you prepare to speak to your motion? Councillor Thompson.
Before I say yes, can I just ask one question through you to the officers? Should that say provide a landscape plan and details?
Officers.
In this instance, there's probably no need necessarily to have a landscaping plan itself.
Yep.
It's certainly something that can be included on the site plan, the location of garden beds and soft landscaping. But if councillors were of a mind to want full landscaping details, we can certainly...
I think if the officers are satisfied with that from an assessment perspective, I'm okay. I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Return back to you, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Yeah.
Just speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, after listening to what's been a very long, robust discussion and debate, and a lot of questions have gone through dissecting various elements of this application, I'm satisfied that what is put before us is certainly a significant improvement to the prior application that failed at VCAT. I can see there's been a willingness from the owner, the applicant and the architect to address the concerns that were raised at VCAT and raised by the residents that have objected in the past. And I believe that what's been proposed is very sympathetic and considerate to the area and respectful to the significance of the individual property. The other concern I have with if we did not support this application is that the summer house, albeit it's been evidenced it has age to it, it appears there was never a permit provided for the construction of that outbuilding. We do not know the integrity of it, and I believe that we'd be irresponsible to reject the application based on the summer house because we don't know how stable that building is, and it isn't contributory, it isn't significant, and it isn't part of the original design. And as I said, without having any permit, council don't hold any records of the stability of it. I also note that the summer house has been altered significantly over various iterations, and I believe that what's put forward tonight provides a very respectful application and design element that will further enhance the home. I do believe that it addresses the conservation issues by the attention to detail throughout the scope of works that's proposed. So I support the officer recommendation with the inclusion of the landscape treatment, and I would like to ask my fellow colleagues to support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. There's no opposition. However, Councillor Thompson, sorry, there is opposition. Oh, I'm terribly sorry, I didn't notice that. There is opposition. I do apologise. Councillor Thompson, do you wish to speak to your motion now or the seconding, or do you reserve your right?
I'll reserve my right to later.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Vigor.
I think Councillor Addis was before me, actually.
You're quite right. I'm not seeing things correctly tonight. Apologies, Councillor Addis.
No
you
problem.
are indeed next.
Thank you. No problem. I am happy to support this motion, but I'm aware that the ward councillor, Councillor Gillies, is not here and had some concerns in line with what some presenters have said, and so I think I just wanted it to be noted that she shared some of the concerns. Clearly, I don't know where she would have landed, but so that they know she did note and did hear and understood what the residents, I'm presuming, had said to her privately. But I do believe that this does respect the heritage fabric of this really quite remarkable house. It's a very beautiful house, and while it isn't a matter of this is better than the previous one, the previous application, clearly it is, and that's has something going for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Addis. Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you. I would, with your permission, Chair, like to, Councillor Gillies has actually asked me if I would read her comments or her statement. Can I do that? And
I don't see anything wrong with that, and you can speak on your behalf. Is that what you're asking me?
I'll speak on her behalf first and then possibly on my own behalf, if that's all right.
I think so. Is there an issue with that?
Yes, of course there is, Chair. I mean, that's unprecedented. And if it was such an incredibly important issue, then that councillor would be here.
Councillor Park, I'm going to ask for some governance here, if there's anything in the governance rules that precludes that.
Councillor has a set amount of time to speak. If she wants to include both of them, then she can do it in a set amount of time. I'll ask you for an extension. That's what I want to do. If Councillor Park is putting a point of order, just ask him to clarify what the basis of that point of order is so you can rule on it.
I have had the governance advice, so there's a couple of ways we can proceed. We can proceed by Councillor Bigger speaking for both herself and Councillor Gillies in her time and ask me for extension, which I'm inclined to give, given the interest in the conversation. But also, Councillor Park, if you were to put a point of order, could you please let me know which the point of order is, and then I can rule on it, whether I'm within my powers to do what I'm doing.
I think you already have, Chair, so I'll remain mute for the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Bigger.
Thank you. So maybe rather than reading her statement verbatim, I'll just comment on a few concerns that she had and ask my fellow councillors to consider them on her behalf. So she did raise concern, Councillor Gillies, about the VCAT statements that have already been actually addressed by one of the members of the public tonight about the proposed demolition and additions were required to address this long-term livability, but Council's Heritage Advisor has said that it's assessed that this extent of demolition would allow an addition that may enable long-term continuing use of the building otherwise completely intact and thus encourage its conservation. I encourage to you that there is yet, I am now reading from her, because I apologize, I'm having a harder time to put it in my own words, I suggest to you that there is yet to be a convincing case for demolition of any external fabric for the house to be brought to modern livable standards. That was her first concern coming out of VCAT. The second one relates to the summer house and whether or not, as a 100-year-old summer house, whether or not there's the opportunity for the summer house to be considered more closely, and it's whether it should be reassessed in association with any new development proposal that may be sought by the applicants. So her concerns do relate largely to the summer house, and I think Councillor Gillies was hopeful that there might be, that councillors might consider ways that summer house could be retained. Now, from my perspective, I guess, yes.
Are you now talking on behalf of yourself?
Sorry,
I might
reset
the clock then.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's been mentioned that this is a significant improvement on the last application, and I guess in my view that's not what we're being asked to consider here. It's not about whether it's a significant improvement on a past application, but it's whether or not this property, which we pretty much have all acknowledged is not only individually significant, but important to this neighbourhood and probably to our community as a whole, because it's such a special property. I never heard regarding to about the summer house, although Councillor Hollingsworth has just mentioned this issue of not having a permit. That's not something I'd heard or possibly read in the report, but I might have just missed it. I guess for me it does still leave that question about whether or not, I didn't feel I had a full answer to whether or not the importance of the summer house has been fully investigated and whether we're really comfortable with that. I do understand, and I hear certainly from Councillor Thompson's questions, and I think probably where he's going to go with his comments, understand that that there are benefits to having that extension well set back, and that were we to retain the summer house, there are questions about how that might be if it is set in front of it. But I guess for me, there's just still enough question about that I'm not comfortable that it's been resolved in regards to the summer house, and I would encourage us to consider whether there's an opportunity still to retain it. And my last comment, I guess, just goes to this idea about assisting long-term conservation and whether or not the arguments that we're making really stand up. Because to me, I don't see that what we're saying here in the chamber really stands up in terms of this idea that there's a need to contribute to the long-term conservation, and that this particular development does that more than, or this particular application does that in a way that we have seen another one not. So I guess I do, that for me raises enough questions that I do think it's worth considering. And I encourage you to, my office, the fellow councillors, to consider whether or not we could protect this. And I would be happy to propose a separate amendment, a separate recommendation were this one to fail. Excuse me.
Thank you, Councillor Bigger. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I support this motion as the seconder. I guess the way that I've approached this, recognising that obviously this, the summer house is quite important to a number of people, but the reflection here is about the conservation of this property, and the conservation of this property doesn't stop and start at the protection of a summer house. It's actually the development itself, and the right for a property owner to develop a property as an individually significant property in a heritage overlay. So you can't see it in isolation. And my fear about proposing to retain the summer house is we don't know what the solution is in terms of any extension. What we've got currently proposed in front of us is a very good garden setting response, where it actually enhances and increases the garden setting, which is in fact a conservation approach. It places any new dwellings towards the north-east corner, as our officers of northwest corner, I think it might be, the furthest position away from any of the street frontages, which supports viewing this building in round, which is also a conservation approach. It's a single-storey extension. It's got a roof garden to it, what appears like that on the plans. I think this is a very appropriate approach to this, and I think we've got to be mindful, without seeing the full picture of the ramifications about removing a summer house, that we don't let perfect be the enemy of good in this instance, because perfect or perfection in this instance, we may not know what the outcome is. I think the additional comments simply just enhance that garden aspect, provides a little bit more clarity. I actually think this property and this proposal is very sympathetic to the fabric of this beautiful, beautiful property, and it will protect it for many generations to come for the interests of the broader community. So I wholeheartedly support the motion put forward by my colleague.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Park.
Chair, I wholly concur with what Councillor Thompson just said, so I won't repeat any of it. I can only express my hope that my colleagues see the wisdom in what was said and support the motion. And I do rather hope that we don't see the absent ward councillor having a vote here tonight as well. So let's hope it's only those of us present.
Thank you, Councillor Buck. That we're definitely not in line with the governance rules. Councillor Hollingsworth, I revert back to you to close off the debate.
Yes, thank you. I will be very quick. I just concur with all that Councillor Thompson has said. I thank the presenters here this evening for coming and putting forward their concerns and investing so much time to thoroughly research and explain. We have listened to all the presenters and have considered what I believe to be is an excellent application, sympathetic to the significance of the home, sympathetic to the heritage precinct, and in fact visually will largely enhance with what is proposed by this application. So as someone that is a strong heritage advocate, I haven't made this decision lightly. I have listened to all that's been said. I have read the officer's recommendation, and I would ask my colleagues to please support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. I will now put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, officers, for your work, and thanks for all the presenters for everything tonight. I might just wait till... we now move to item number 3.2, P220573, construction of a three-storey apartment building comprising of 10 dwellings over basement, 65 Walpole Street. This item will be presented by Ms. Lorini. Ms. Lorini, please have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I present application PP 22/0573 for the construction of a three-storey apartment building comprising 10 dwellings at 65 Walpole Street in Kew. I would like to firstly apologise. There is an error in the executive summary on one of the lines. I refer to the zoning as neighbourhood residential. It should read as general residential, consistent with the officer's report. So I apologise for that small error in the executive summary. As clarified, the subject site is zoned within the General Residential Zone, Schedule 3, the purpose of which is to encourage a diversity of housing types and housing growth, particularly in locations offering good access to services and transport. Strategically, the site falls within an area identified as an eclectic inner suburban precinct with capacity to support moderate change. The site is indeed well situated within proximity to Kew Junction Commercial Precinct to the south and offers a variety of transport opportunities to support modest housing growth as proposed. The relevant neighbourhood character precinct number 9 notes that this area has a range of 1- and 2-storey detached dwellings and 2- and 3-storey apartments that date from the 1880s until now. Review of the immediate site context indicates that Walpole Street is representative of this eclectic mix of housing typologies. The subject site is not affected by any planning overlays, but does sit within proximity of a nearby significant graded property in the heritage overlay directly to the south. This property is situated on a battle axe allotment and therefore partially concealed from view to the streetscape. The proposed development displays a high level of compliance with the Burundara planning scheme. The proposed apartments all have either dual or triple aspect with high levels of eternal amenity. Car parking is provided in excess of Clause 5206 with 2 spaces provided per apartment. Generous setbacks position the proposal within a landscape setting consistent with the prevailing streetscape. The proposal is contemporary in design, utilising curved brickwork and render with metal cladding accents. Council's urban designer notes that the proposal takes inspiration from adjoining inter- and post-war houses, in particular the neighbouring Art Deco dwelling to the north, and has been carefully and delicately resolved within the streetscape. A total of 14 objections have been received to the proposal following public advertising. The objections predominantly relate to the following concerns: mischaracterisation of the private open space to the south for 63 Walpole Street and subsequent amenity impacts to adjoining properties, visual bulk, insufficient landscaping, excessive site coverage, overdevelopment and saturation of apartment buildings within Walpole Street, failure to adequately respond to the adjacent heritage building. It is considered that the proposal is consistent with the anticipated scale of change within the area. The proposal delivers an increase in housing within a design that has been carefully considered with regard to neighbourhood character and amenity impact to adjoining dwellings. It is recommended that Council issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit subject to the conditions detailed in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms Lorini. 8 people have indicated they wish to make a submission on this matter. 6 are against the recommendation and 2 support the recommendation. I will start calling the presenters against the recommendation. I'll start by first calling Mr Robert Murdoch, followed by Mr Cliff Smith. If you could approach the... I beg your pardon?
Ms. Robin Murdoch.
I beg your pardon, Ms. Robert Murdoch. Thank you so much. If you could begin with your name and suburb, thank you.
Robin Murdoch, Q.
You can take the seat. Thank you.
Mr Chair, councillors, I live in Walpole Street, Q, and I live in that part between Malmesbury Street and Eglinton Street. Now, in the past few years, we've had a great deal of development just in this area between Eglinton and Malmesbury. What is being constructed currently in that part is 27 units. Now, calling it social housing is surprising. The advertised
Ms Murdoch,
price...
this does not relate to the report. There's no reference to social housing in the report.
I thought it came up when, I'm sorry, I forgot, I don't know your name. Eclectic. Well, we've had 27...
Is there any references to social housing?
There's no
references
social
to social housing
proposed.
Well, I'll go with eclectic then.
Okay.
And that was certainly mentioned.
Thank you.
On the corner of Malmesbury and Walpole, we're getting 27 have been approved, 27 apartments, and those are being advertised between 1.35 and 4.65. At number 82, we've had another 5 units put up, and the townhouses we've had put up just within this area is 14, and that, in my mathematics, brings about 46 new dwelling areas in Walpole Street between Eglinton and Malmesbury. Now, some of that 27 are in Eglinton Street, but a great bit of it is within, is certainly within Walpole Street. I don't think 46 development in a very small block, which already houses a synagogue and an old people's home and a number of other flats. When I first moved there 20 years ago, it was leafy green. It's no longer. We've got no birds, no green. And all we're getting are more, I appreciate it's an activity centre, but we are getting more and more unrestrained development. That's it.
Thank you. There'll be no questions. You may return to your seat. I appreciate your presentation. Thank you very much. I call upon Mr Clifford Smith, followed by Mr Andrew Tracy.
Thank you very much, councillors and council executives, for this opportunity to speak to you tonight.
If you could start with your name and suburb, sir.
My apologies, Mr Chair. My name is Clifford Ian Gordon-Smith. I live at 63 Walpole Street, Q.
Thank you.
We live immediately to the south of the proposed development in a significant heritage property. As a general proposition, we don't oppose appropriate development. However, we have some significant concerns with some of the key elements of this report. Number one, our whole front garden and north-facing side gardens have not been treated as the secluded, private, open spaces they are. Therefore, the proposed screening is manifestly inadequate, and furthermore, the report makes little or no comment on this issue. May I respectfully show you this hand-drawn diagram to give you a sense of the development. That's Walpole Street. That is our high front fence. That is the proposed 4-level development to the north of our front garden. This is a driveway. This is a landscape garden, a footpath, a landscape garden, and a landscape garden down there. This is the bench where we sit. I understand that you have had some photographs circulated showing what the landscape garden looks like. Do the councillors have those photographs in front of them? I can circulate them. Thank you. That shows you our garden, and that shows you where the development is going. This is on the photograph which I've listed number 1. The photograph I've listed number 4 is also another view of that garden, and it shows you where the proposed development is going, which will be overlooking our garden. Thank you. We love this garden. We love sitting in the sun on the bench. We've put a lot into this garden, and we're very proud that Open Gardens Victoria have asked us to make it open to the public for their charitable pursuits. Number 2, the proposed development is very large and very close to our boundary. The proposed outcome leaves little space for genuine canopy trees to soften this interface. Number 3, inadequate investigation has occurred in respect of 2 significant trees within our property. While some assessment has been undertaken in respect of basement excavation, little or no assessment has been undertaken in respect of the footings for paths, paving, retaining walls, fences and the like. We are also unaware of any exploratory route investigation which should be ordinarily required in these circumstances. Councillors, we don't oppose appropriate development. However, we need to have checks and balances, and the beauty of our democratic process, we get a chance to come along tonight and put this forward to you. On the basis of this proposal, I'd ask you that you reject this application. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. There have been no questions. You may return to the gallery. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Mr. Chair, could I circulate a couple of more photographs of our garden, particularly showing the heritage property?
You may give it to one of the officers that will come take it from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, I hope I haven't overstayed my welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Tracy, I call upon Mr. Andrew Tracy to the horseshoe table. If you could start by your name and suburb, sir.
Hello, thank you for your time. My name is Andrew Tracy. I own a property in Walpole Street, diagonally opposite the subject property. For the record, I'm also far from anti-development. I actually make my living from development, but I am definitely anti-overdevelopment, so I do not support this proposal. 10 apartments, 6 of them 3-bedroom apartments and 4 of them 2-bedroom apartments is a gross overdevelopment of the site. You noted that under a general residential zone, the objective is to support a moderate change reflecting a mixture of detached dwellings, villas, townhouses, as well as apartment buildings. I would put it to you strongly that this is far from a moderate change. 10 units replacing 1 house is far from moderate, it's excessive. Walpole Street has had, I think in this one block, 46 apartments in a single block delivered or being delivered from only 3 developments in the past few years. 4 wrongs won't make a right in Walpole Street. I would urge you to consider that moderate change does not mean even more significant acceleration of the deterioration of the streetscape with overdevelopment of this site and a greater skew to denser apartment development changing the character of the neighbourhood forever. The proposed development is a bulky 3-storey building with a large basement. It has very little regard to the surrounding buildings. Its very significant scale will continue to erode the streetscape and the character of the neighbourhood, and will also significantly increase traffic. As I said, I'm supportive of development, but appropriate development with less dwellings, greater setback and more genuine green space. A similar development immediately next door to us at 82 Walpole Street on a slightly smaller site was reduced to 5 apartments with a greater setback after we went all the way through VCAT. I would consider the development of more like 6 apartments with less bulk, more significant setback, more genuine green space would be far more appropriate for the neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. There have been no questions. You may return to your seat in the gallery. Thank you very much. I call upon Mrs. Christine Lanigan, followed by Ms. Suzanne Smith. Mrs. Lanigan, if you could start with your name and suburb, thank you.
So I'm Christine Lanigan from Kew. Thank you. I am the owner of 67 Walpole Street.
Could we have the microphone a little bit closer, please? Just thank you very much.
I'm the owner of 67 Walpole Street, which is a 1-storey house adjacent on the south side to number 65, and I've enjoyed living in this house for over 20 years. My submission is that the enjoyment of my property, including my view to the south, will be very much compromised by the height and bulk of this development. My house is just over 3 metres from the boundary fence, and the plans show that the proposed development will be 3.1 metres from this fence on the first and second stories, and 5.1 metres on the third storey, which is actually slightly less than the required setback. Also, the proposed building will extend on the south side of my property from the front of my house to beyond the garage at the back of my property. Now, I've got a couple of photos, and I apologise. I think I could probably have had these copied for everyone. But to explain, this is the back of my house. This is number 65. As you can see, I've got just about all
Perhaps we can put the photos and project them on the overhead. We can project those photos overhead so everybody could see it.
That would be lovely.
Thank you, Ms.
very
Lanigan.
much. Yes, that one first, I think. Thanks. Is this part of my 3 minutes that would take it up? Sorry.
Well.
Well, while you're doing that, anyway, you'll be able to see that there are windows all along the back of my property, and including a semicircle which goes round to that south side of my property. So it's a full semicircle. It's not illustrated as set on the plans which have been submitted. And and that area is on that side, on that south side of the house. I've got at the very end is a bedroom actually facing south. Then there's a laundry, and then there's my kitchen and my dining area and living area there. There's also, on the left-hand side is my computer, which is facing a window which faces south. And then the second, have you got the second one, please? Will show you looking directly south. Now, the proposal is for the development to go all the way from the beginning of my house at the front to beyond that garage, the beginning of the garage. And it will be very high, being 3 stories. And at the moment, I've got a view to the Victorian house then, which is supposed to be about the same height as the new proposal. So when you bring that forward, it's probably going to be as high as those palm trees. So it completely blocked my view of the sky on that side of my house from both my living areas and also from my back garden, and also when I'm seated at the computer. And I'm at home most of the day, and 90% of my time would be spent in that part of the house and garden. So this is a huge problem for me and would give me a feeling of claustrophobia, and I just get quite upset just thinking about the fact that I wouldn't be able to see the sky on that side. Now, what I would suggest is that either make the building a 2-storey and push it back from the fence another 3 to 5 metres, because it's far too close to me, or if they really want 3 stories, then again move it back 3 or 5 metres, but finish the building at the end of my house in order to give me a view of the sky from both my living areas and my back garden. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Lilligan.
Do you wish to retain those photos?
Not necessarily. We're happy to give them back to you.
All right,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for your presentation this evening.
Thank you.
I'd like to call upon Mrs. Suzanne Smith, followed by Mr. John McKinlay. If you'd start with your name and suburb, thank you.
Suzanne, Walpole Street, Kew. I live at the house, at the significant heritage house right next to this proposed overdevelopment. And basically, Cliff and Andrew have said everything that I agree with. So I would just like to say that it's changing the character of the neighbourhood, and it's a gross overdevelopment of the site. 10 units from one house is a huge change, and based on the information that you've heard tonight, I would like the councillors to refuse the application.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Councillor Thompson has a question. Mrs. Smith, one of the councillors has a question. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. I'll take the opportunity, because I didn't get a chance to ask your husband this. He mentioned your properties under a heritage overlay, which
Yes.
I've just done a little bit of
Yes, it
research
is.
on, 353.
Yes.
And the garden was cited as a heritage garden. Are you aware of that being part of the heritage overlay, your garden?
Yes, yes.
So it's specifically protected as a...
And it has 2 very large protected trees in the front.
Okay, I'll take maybe
That there's
question
been
on
no
those.
investigation into what's going to happen to the roots of those trees.
Thank you. The question on notice for the officers when we come to that time.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson, and thank you, Ms. Smith. I call upon Mr. John McKinlay. Mr. McKinlay? I beg your pardon? Thank you very much. Thank you.
The issues.
Thank you. I've got 2 more presenters this evening supporting the recommendation. First one is Ms. Zoe Hugh. Ms. Hugh, if you could start with your name and suburb, thank you.
Certainly. Hi there, my name's Zoe Hugh. I'm the current owner of 65 Walpole Street, Kew.
Come a bit closer to the mic,
I'm so
that'd be
sorry,
great.
thank
That's
you.
all right, no problem at all.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr Chair. Good evening, councillors. As I said, my name is Zoe Hugh. I'm the applicant, and together with my husband, we're the owners of 65 Walpole Street, Kew. This has been our family home with our children for over 12 years. We have lived in Boroondara for over 40 years. The decision to develop our property is motivated by genuine family reasons. Our intentions are to keep half the apartments for us and our children to occupy as our homes, to ensure that our children can afford to live in a suburb where they were born, have grown up, attended school, played sports, and can remain close to where their families, grandparents, and friends live. These dwellings are intended to be our homes and nest egg for our retirement and to pass on to our children to support them and their families well into the future. As a family, we have put a lot of thought and planning into this proposal for well-designed and high-quality housing, which is appropriate for the location. We've worked closely with our architects and town planners to design homes to meet our family's needs and have accepted their advice in preparing a proposal which complies with the Boroondara planning scheme. The design, floor plans and finishes reflect our family's living preferences and the quality of housing that we would be proud to call our homes. Given the location and large size of the property, the proposal also provides an opportunity for other families and couples to live in a well-designed, high-quality, diverse and affordable housing, close to the Kew Junction Activity Centre, local shops, jobs, public transport and other community services. We, together with our architects and town planners, have also worked closely with the town council planning and review officers to address the points which have been raised to ensure that the proposal is well within the Boroondara planning policy and preferred neighbourhood character precinct statement for the area, and which integrates with and complements the very scale and type of housing in the precinct. We thank you for the opportunity to speak and we'll be happy to answer any questions or refer any specific planning questions to our town planning advisor, Simon from Contour. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Ms. Hugh. Councillor Thompson, thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Hugh, for your presentation.
Thank you.
You mentioned that this is a dwelling for the benefit of the family and 50% would be sold off for investment or for whatever commercial purposes are necessary. Is it your intention to retain the private dwellings for family indefinitely?
Yes, yes.
If there was a planning mechanism that would allow councillors, and maybe this is another question I'll notice, such as a section 173 that would cite that they do remain in family ownership, is that something you'd be prepared to
definitely.
consider?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm not sure if there is, but I'll ask that question later. Thank you, Ms. Hugh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I have one question, if there are no other questions.
Certainly, Mr. Chair.
Just a question. You said you lived in so many years in Boroondara.
Yes, since I was born.
Absolutely.
My
So
whole life.
you must have a close attachment to the area.
Very,
If
very
you were
much.
if you were in that area and you were on the other side, how would you view the proposal?
Well, unfortunately, nothing's ideal. Everyone has their own opinions of how things are going to be, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Because in the future, there might be other developments that are even more apartments and things like that in the area. We don't know. But I think for now, the number of apartments that we are proposing, I think is more realistic. And it's not a matter of how many apartments, it's a matter of the size. It doesn't matter whether we have 10 apartments or we have 15 or 20 apartments. I don't think that's a relevant question. I don't think that's significant.
Are you comfortable with the visual bulk in that part of the street?
Well, it doesn't matter. It's going to be a bulk whether it's a house. Houses are bulky too. You can build a double-storey house. That would have the same bulk anyway.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Hugh. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers. You may return to sit in the gallery. Thank you very much.
much.
I call upon Mr. Simon Gilbertson as our last presenter. Thank you, Mr. Gilbertson, for your name and details. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Simon Gilbertson. I reside in Hawthorne East, but I'm here as Director of Contour Consultants as the town planners assisting the permit applicants in this matter. The council officer has summarised a number of things that I would have said, so I'm not going to go over those, other than to say that we support the assessment and the recommendation of the officer that is before the councillors this evening. I think it's important that through this application process that none of the council's internal departments have objected to the grant of a planning permit for the proposed development. After the application was advertised and council's internal referral comments were received, our client amended the plans to address concerns and issues that had been raised by council departments and also objectors. So that included a formal amendment to the application to introduce additional privacy screening to prevent overlooking more to the properties to the northwest and to the south. It also included some changes to the materials and finishes of the building in response to Council's urban design comments to be, in Council's urban designers' opinion, more in keeping with the character of the area. I make the point that within Boroondara, there is a lot of different residential zones utilised to manage potential change. This site is within the general residential zone. We know that of the suite of residential zones, the neighbourhood residential zone is widely used, and they have different expectations in terms of the level of change that might be anticipated for a particular area. The neighbourhood character guidelines here and the zoning of the land identify that it is in an area of mixed character. And we are seeing that with examples of more contemporary apartment buildings that are happening within Walpole Street and more broadly within Precinct 9. And what is before the Council this evening, and again I endorse the Council Officer's report, will sit comfortably with the emerging character of the area without having a detrimental impact to the streetscape or the adjoining properties. I'd just like to pick up on a couple of the matters raised by some of the other submitters, if I can, and just in relation to the protection of trees that are outside the site boundary. The recommendation from the officers is to include a tree management plan that would require details of any works within the tree protection zones and structural root zones of the trees on the adjoining properties. So we know how valued vegetation is within Boroondara, not just within planning, but within local laws. And there is the condition recommended by the officers to ensure the retention and health of those trees remains. As I said, the application was amended to address a number of the concerns that were raised by objectors, including additional screening to manage potential overlooking to those properties. And for that reason, we, again, support the Council Officer's recommendation. It's a thorough assessment of this proposal, and we request that the councillors support that recommendation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Gilbertson. Councillor Addis, followed by Councillor Thompson.
Thanks very much for your presentation. You no doubt heard that the residents each side are concerned about their privacy being taken away by the development. I heard you say that there is screening. Can you just clarify that a little bit? The screens are to a height where people won't be able to look into other people's gardens?
That's right. There's a mixture of screening mechanisms that have been employed in the development, but the screening has been proposed to meet the planning scheme standard to prevent overlooking. So it's a maximum 25% transparent up to 1.7 metres above the finished floor level. So if you're standing on a level, it is screened up to a minimum 1.7 metres above that.
So you'd have to stand on a chair to...
You would.
Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Gilbertson. Thank you. I'm just looking at some architectural elevations, town planning drawing TP15. I'm intrigued to understand the architectural response in relation to the heritage building to the south, in relation to the roof heights and those sorts of things. How did your applicant approach that?
Well, the reference to so firstly, the subject site, as you know, is not in the heritage overlay, but there is the site-specific overlay affecting the property to the south.
Yep.
The local policy in relation to that relationship between heritage and not heritage is to provide a transition. So that's at clause 1501-3, I think, off the top of my head. And what I say is proposed here is, firstly, there is a generous setback to the property to number 63 to the south, and that's from ground, and then a recessed third level as well, providing a greater setback. And in terms of the building height, I think it does provide that a comfortable relationship with the existing dwelling on that property. In terms of the how that fits from a streetscape perspective, the dwelling at number 63 is well set back from the streetscape. It's quite deep into the property, and you will have seen from the allotment pattern that at some point in time it was subdivided, and you've got number 61A sitting in front of the site, in front of that dwelling to Walpole Street. And as Mr Smith alluded to, there is the sort of batten fence or palisade type fence, front fence that enables views into that front garden area where the driveway and pedestrian access is. There's not a wide view to that heritage dwelling. In my view, the architectural response here is about providing that transition and separation between the two dwellings.
And if I can just have one further follow-up, in relation to what Mr Smith mentioned earlier about the front garden and side garden, which identified on his plans as private open space. What's your response to how you've approached that?
Certainly, through you, Mr Chairman. My view is it's not secluded private open space, that area in front of the dwelling. It comprises a driveway, a pedestrian path. There is a sort of gravelled garden bed with a seat in it. But in effect, and sitting behind that, between the dwelling and the street, is car parking, hard stand area, and then the veranda to the dwelling at number 63. There are other areas immediately adjacent to the dwelling at number 63 that I say perform that role of being the secluded private open space. The function of this area in front of the car parking area to number 63 is more akin to a front garden than a secluded private open space area. And we form that view, and that view is supported by the officers as well.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just a question with regard to the alleged overlooking with regard to window treatments, and I think it was confirmed there'd be a 25% blockout. Is that your...
It would be up to a maximum 25% transparency, so there's a mixture of opaque glass and screening proposed to the south, to the west and to the northern elevations to prevent that overlooking above the ground floor. So it's not at the ground floor because there's the
level 2, level
boundary
3
fences. That's right.
Right, okay. And the sections that would be opaque, would they actually stop that visual looking? The reason I ask is there is some screening where if you stand back internally 2 or 3 metres, you can actually look straight through. And I'm just trying to work out if this is going to actually give the assurance of privacy for the other neighbours, or whether or not we could consider perhaps an amendment to ensure that there is, absolutely no overlooking.
I would absolutely encourage, through you, Mr Chairman, sorry, I kept forgetting that. I would encourage you, the screening, to ensure that it meets the planning scheme standard in relation to the protection of overlooking. So, yes. And that could be confirmed by way of an addition to condition 1, which would enable the council officers to assess the plans to ensure that that has been met.
Has been complied. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate what you're saying. I'm aware with the standard, but thank you. I might ask the officers a question later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. There appears to be no further question by my colleagues. I may have one small question for you. One of the issues that have come through from the objectors has been the visual bulk in that particular part of the street. Have you done something to sort of a remedial action on that in terms of the design? I think it's related to what Councillor Thompson asked, but also, did you meet with the neighbours and the other residents nearby to have a discussion as to what further things may be possible to just make it a little bit lighter?
Through you, Mr Chair, the plans were amended in response to urban design comments that made changes to the architectural presentation to Walpole Street. So we heard the officer speak to the curvilinear presentation to Walpole Street and changes to some of the materials and finishes, as well as the front fence treatment to Walpole Street, again in response to feedback from the council officers and internal departments at the time. I have to say, and I put my hand up, I've stepped into this application quite late as one of my fellow directors is currently in the labour ward at hospital. So I'm not aware of any meeting that's occurred with objectors in relation to the application. But certainly we received a copy of the objections and the council's internal referral comments, and they form the basis of the formal amendment to the application.
Thank you very much, Mr Gilson. No further question. You may return to your seat. The time for questions are over, so sorry about that. We now have exhausted all the presenters this evening, and I will return for the officer response. Thank you very much. Ms Lorini.
Through you, Chair. With regard to matters arising, with regard to the landscaping of 63 Walpole and its historical significance, the statement of significance, the site was originally part of a larger allotment, and the MMBW plans detail that it was part of a larger allotment, and it was subsequently subdivided off with the dwelling in front of it, which compromises some of its visibility to the streetscape. With regard to the landscaping that remains on the site, the front garden treatment of the battle axe section, the driveway and such, the statement of significance does note that the landscaping appears contemporary, so it's not original significant heritage landscaping fabric through there, if that clarifies that point for you.
Just a clarification for that. Was the question that the landscape was heritage, or was it that it was going to be in open gardens? And I think maybe I will ask the gentleman if that's what he was having his hand up for.
I think through my question, Chair, it was the statement by Mr Smith saying it was a heritage garden, and by virtue of the citation, that was my question.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Please proceed.
Yep. With regard to the characterisation of private open space, the planning scheme clarifies that there are two types of private open space. There's private open space, which is an outdoor area of a dwelling or residential building or land for the exclusive use of the occupants. It then further clarifies secluded private open space is that part of private open space primarily intended for outdoor living activities, which enjoys a reasonable amount of privacy. So the planning scheme does have the distinction between what I suppose you would call private open spaces, like a front garden type setting, and that was the position we took in the assessment of the application. The driveway and pedestrian pathway area, there is a front fence, it is partially concealed from view, there is some visibility of that area, but it is a utilitarian in that it serves a purpose for vehicle parking and vehicle ingress and egress. The driveway and parking area, for example, would not qualify for characterisation under the garden area definition, the mandatory control under the scheme. So it is a private open space, and considerations in the planning scheme under clause 55 for overshadowing and overlooking turn your mind to secluded private open space, and that is what is protected under the scheme, rather than private open space. So things like your front yard and your driveway do not have the same level of protection.
Councillor Thompson, are you comfortable with the response?
Yes, I am. Thanks,
Thank you,
Chair.
Councillor Thompson. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you for your patience. Just a question for the officers with regard to, and particularly level 3. Are you able to advise, is there the opaque screening on the glass/doors at that level as well, or is it just reliant on the balcony screening?
The balcony screening, if you need to reach over, apologies, through you, Chair. The balcony screening, if you go to the plan, does go extensively around the top level.
Right. And what's the height of the balcony? Is it 1.5 or 1.7?
1.7 to plans.
Right, and the balcony appears on the plan anyway to be fairly obscure. Would that be your understanding?
The balcony at that level is, it is masonry for part of it, for the curved masonry, and then it has the PS1 material, which is the privacy screening material, which is a high laser perforated metal screen, noted to plans maximum 25% transparency hole pattern.
Right.
So it's visually broken part way up so that it's masonry for a section, and then the metal screening above to get to that height of 1.7.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. No questions for officers, but foreshadow a motion.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Biggar.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I don't have my question in front of me, having a bit of a computer issue, but I think on page 6 of 79, when it refers to internal referrals and some of the supported subject to conditions, can I just check whether the applicant is happy to accept all of the conditions that have been?
Yes, the applicant indicated that they support it and are happy to accept the conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Biggar. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of the presenters expressed concern about the degree of setback on the side boundaries, and I think the comment was made that what was being offered was more than was actually required. Can you confirm that either way?
Through you, Chair. Yes, one of the side setbacks adjacent to the property to the north is non-compliant by about 10 centimetres, primarily adjacent to where the neighbour's garage is located, and that is slightly a factor of the slope of the site as well. So it's not non-compliant for the entire length of the wall, just a small segment of the wall. Otherwise, all other side and rear setbacks are compliant or with the standard or exceed the standard requirements, and those are listed in the table of the delegates' report. If you want, I can go to that and go through each setback if you require.
So you're in your assessment, the small amount of non-compliance is not of any substantial effect?
It's 10 centimetres is almost imperceptible.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
so yes, it is my opinion that it's
satisfactory.
not for
great.
It's not for the entire length of the wall, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Addis. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. I guess by virtue of the officer's recommendation that's on the screen, the transitional arrangements to the setbacks to the southern property, the heritage property, officers are comfortable with that as per what our planner indicated. Is that the case?
Through you, Chair. Yes, both myself and Council's urban designer were satisfied that it provided a satisfactory transition with the significant property, particularly given that that significant property has been compromised with the subdivision to the front. So if you visit the streetscape, it is not readily visible to the streetscape, but it does provide a it's the word escapes me. It is similar in scale and height and provides that transition. It's also, if you look at the existing elevation and the proposed elevation, the roof ridge of the current dwelling is only approximately 1.3 metres below what will be the parapet height of the proposed dwelling. So comparable to what is existing approximately in height to the streetscape.
Yep, thank you. Just one further question with regards to garden area. Is there opportunity for deep-rooted planting in this proposal? It doesn't look like there is around the perimeter of the site, perimeter of the building.
Through you, Chair. There is canopy tree provision provided in the landscaping plan, and our arborist has reviewed it, and the basement setbacks are sufficient that there should be deep soil planting capacity.
And is our arborist comfortable with the notion that Mr Smith indicated that his trees on the southern property are impacted by the basement?
Through you, Chair. Our arborist has assessed the development proposal and has looked at the encroachment within the tree protection zones of the neighbouring trees. They have recommended the tree management plan, but are happy with the level of encroachment can be managed to facilitate the basement. They've also put some conditions about levels for paving through those tree protection zones as well. If you look to the, may be difficult to see from the site picture of the existing conditions, but there is hard paving existing for the current dwelling and a retaining wall, so there is some impact currently within that zone, which Council's arborist took into consideration in forming their position.
Thank you, Chair. No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Having exhausted questions, Councillor Watson, now would be the time to move the motion.
Thank you. I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation as printed on the screen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Thompson.
Happy to second the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. To assist the mover, is anybody opposed to this motion? I'm going to... Councillor Sinfield, half and half?
I'm undecided, Chair.
Okay. I'm not sure I can actually record that, but I will oppose the motion and for the purpose of analysing it a little bit further. So, Councillor Watson, as the mover, do you wish to speak to your motion?
I'll speak very briefly, Chair. I think the issues on the site have been pretty exhaustively talked about this evening, and I think that the less said the better in this particular instance. I do note that you are the ward councillor, and I move this from the floor with. At your request, happy to do that, and I fully support the officer's recommendation. I think they've done an outstanding job of being able to come up with some conditions that are sensitive to the adjoining properties. I'm actually quite a fan of the design. I like the Art Deco notes. And in the rounded windows, it's got a simplicity about it that appeals to me. But we're not here to debate what I like. It does comply, and on that basis, I'm happy to support what our officers have recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Thompson, do you wish to speak now, or do you reserve the right?
Happy to reserve my right. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I will then, any other councillors? Sorry, Councillor Sinfield.
Just briefly, Chair, and I do note, as Councillor Watson said, you are the ward councillor for this area. I just thought that it was worth commenting that we absolutely hear the submissions that have been made tonight by the residents. But unfortunately, I think the reality is that if this was opposed tonight, it would probably be supported at VCAT, and I don't want to give the residents the false hope that, in fact, I think this would withstand the scrutiny at VCAT. I quite like the design. I think there's great street appeal, and I commend the architects on that design. I note that it is also fully compliant with 5206 and the car parking requirements. And that's of particular interest to me because the density and the densification within Walpole Street and the precinct is absolutely noticeable. The traffic through there is phenomenal and increasing all the time, and there has been recent development, and we do absolutely note that recent development throughout that area, through Malmesbury and Walpole, and that's it's felt when you drive through that area. The traffic congestion is significant, so I appreciate that the owners and the architects have met the requirements of 5206 and provided 20 car spaces on site, which is actually above what they're required to. I think that 16 is the required on those calculations, and they've provided 20. So I applaud them on that, but I did just want to note that we do empathise with the neighbours around, and these decisions are not made easily. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Anders.
Yes, look, I do support the officer's recommendation. A bit like our mayor said, it is sad to hear that people's amenity is going to be affected, and we do hear it, and I think we struggle with these decisions because, like the people who presented, I wouldn't exactly be thrilled if this was being built next to me. I'd be in here complaining too, but sadly, we administer the planning scheme. We don't set it. And if we could set it, I think we'd want it to be different. But we're a little bit stuck. And we do have sympathy with you, but we need to make appropriate decisions that can be defended should it go to a higher authority. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Addis. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Addis was exactly picked up on what I was going to say. We administer, in this instance, the state planning scheme in terms of the zoning of this land being a GRZ3. It actually applies to the whole of Walpole Street. So any as of right that any resident along that street has the ability to develop their land in a similar fashion to this. We can't penalise someone from having aspirations and having the ability to develop their land under a zone that's created by the state government. It's not necessarily Burundara Council the enemy here, but we've got to be sensible in our approach to assessing those planning rules. And in this instance, this development complies. Are there areas where it could probably be improved? Yes, there are, but in essence, if it's not us approving it, as Councillor Ada says, it would be another authority approving it, and at least this way we have the ability to hear from our residents in detail, and I empathise with them. But as you can see from number 63 on the south, that was subdivided at an earlier stage, so the heritage integrity of that property isn't exactly as it was at that point in time it was subdivided. So we've got to get used to change, unfortunately. We can't preserve everything for how it is, but we've got to do it in a managed way. So I support this. I think it's a good design outcome. I think it's responsible, it's empathetic, and the officers have done an exceptional job working with the applicant to get the outcome that's before us. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Sinfield, you've got your light on still? Councillor Park.
I just wanted to remind everybody it is actually the Burundara planning scheme. It's our planning scheme. It's our document. We administer that. We make decisions based upon it. I'm happy with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Park. I might make a few words on opposing the application and being the ward councillor, and thank you, Councillor Watson, for moving the motion, and Councillor Thompson for seconding it, and all the councillors for really asking relevant and empathetic questions, because even though I oppose to it, the motion, I have really struggled with this one, and I've struggled with some of the reasons that Councillor Sinfield raised, because I know that area very well. I've got 3 daughters that went to MLC, and that was a daily run, so I have seen the traffic develop, and I know that's not the issue at hand, but I have seen what that community has gone through, and I fully empathise with it. And I do also understand and have seen the architectural response by the development, and I am torn because it is a reasonable response in some ways. But one of the ways that I think that goes against the character of that area, if you know that area well, and I went back today just to see exactly the houses and how they fit together. It's at the high part of the street, and the visual bulk, I think, is the primary issue there. And that I'm not convinced that the architectural response has taken care of that. There's 3 stories. Somebody even mentioned 4 because there's an add-on at the top of the building for, obviously, as a plant room. The visual bulk cannot be taken away once it's there. And I know we said that it's only 1.5 metres or thereabouts from the current house, but the current house has got a pitched roof, so it has a different response to the area. It feels a bit lighter. And I'm sure if those conversations have been had with the neighbourhood, maybe a lighter architectural response would have achieved very similar aims. And that's one of the primary reasons that I'm sort of driven to oppose the motion. The other is, say what the arborists have said, and I have no reason to argue against their professional views, but having such a large footprint, it would be exceedingly difficult to have the deep canopy trees planted there and establishing themselves. That's just a hypothesis that I have from other areas that I've seen. And that's another area, given that we are in a time where canopy is key for climate and other reasons. And that's another reason that I'm opposed to that. The other issue, the heritage will certainly be really substantially impacted in a way where this development will be the primary building there. It's about the same height as the heritage building from the diagrams, so that gives me a pause to stop as well when you put other things together. And looking at all the various boxes that need to be ticked, sometimes they can be ticked, but the overall and some may not be appropriate, and that's where I think wisdom can come into play and target the development for the actual area like that. They are my reasons for opposing it, but I understand I'll be in the minority tonight, and I will go back to Councillor Watson if she wishes to round out the debate.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly to thank the officers for the work that they've done in listening to the concerns of the residents, and to thank the residents for coming and sharing some of their concerns about this development. Also want to thank my fellow councillors for the very thoughtful and considered debate on this particular motion before us tonight, and commend the motion on the screen to my fellow colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, Councillor Watson. I'll now put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. Having finished the substantial part of the evening, we move next to general business. Councillors, are there any matters of general business? There be no matters of general business. Any urgent business? No urgent business. No confidential business. Time to close the meeting. Before I close the meeting, I'd like to thank you all who have joined us this evening. I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting closed. Thank you.